Okay, I had to share that. Okay, let me go on. Satan, the accuser of the brethren, God says, put all your hope in me, because God says I have the strength and the power. And this is why discernment is a must for the Christian, because Satan is a great deceiver. He is a great deceiver of the brethren. Discernment. And if you are grieving and quenching the Holy Spirit, you're not going to be able to hear the voice of God, because we have so many voices that are continually speaking to us all day long. Paul says, I want to do the right thing. Help me, somebody. This is what Paul says. After Paul persecuted, his first name was Saul. He persecuted Christians because he was offended by the fact that they were not practicing the same religion that he had. He was angry with Jesus Christ and anyone that believed that Jesus Christ was the Messiah. Personally, he was offended. Saul, his name was Saul. Now his name is Paul. He persecuted the Christians, children, women, men. He had them thrown in jail, in the dungeons, attacked by wild dogs. Saul. Until Jesus touched him. And he's writing he's writing a lot what I'm reading today because of an offense. And Satan blinded him, but God stepped in to teach us today that be conscious, be protective of your spirit, because Satan wants you to think that is somebody that has flesh and blood that is making your life miserable and is not a human being. There was a situation where Jesus asked the disciples, who do men say that I am? They reply, some say Elijah, some say the prophets, some say John the Baptist. Peter says, you are the Son of the living God. They must have all turned around when Peter said that. Christ says to Peter, he must have smiled when he heard Peter say this. I'm just saying, because here's a lesson, here's a time where the things that Christ was teaching the disciples, it is getting through. Christ must have said, oh, somebody's learning something today. And Peter says, you're the Son of the living God. And Christ says to Peter, flesh and blood, like we're saying here today in Ephesians chapter 6, Christ says, flesh and blood, Peter, did not reveal to you who I am. Because flesh, the human being, you, me, do not have the ability to become sensitive to who God is. We can't touch God unless God does something to us and for us. And Christ knew that God had did something to Peter. He sent a spiritual message into Peter's inner man. And Peter responds, you are the Christ. And Christ says to Peter around the rest of the disciples as an opportunity to teach flesh and blood. So Christ teaches us that there's nothing that you can do on your own. Get that message. Now, in the same chapter, there was a time when, the same chapter, Christ was sharing with the gospel, sharing with the disciples that I must go away. I have to participate, or I have to become a living sacrifice for you and the world. Allegorically, he's saying to the disciples and who else is around him. The same Peter who had allowed the Spirit of God to enter into him somehow had allowed Satan to enter him through the flesh. And he says to Jesus, he pulls him aside, the same Peter who God spoke to reveal to him who Christ was. Now he says to Christ, it is not necessary for you to endure the punishment of the cross. The same Peter that told Christ that you are the living Son of God. Now he's telling Christ it's not necessary for you to go to the cross. Christ turns to him, or in his direction, as I'm looking into the lens of the camera, and says, get behind me, Satan. Now hold it. In the same chapter, Peter says to Christ that you are the Son of God. And Christ says you could not have that understanding unless God revealed it to you. So God used Peter and he spoke to Peter. But now in the same chapter, Peter says you don't have to go to the cross, as if he became more intelligent than the Messiah. We think sometimes we're smarter than God. And God says, get behind me, Satan. So it teaches us that we have to make a choice. We have to make a decision every day on who we want to serve. Do we want to serve our flesh? Or do we want to serve the Spirit of God? Which one? Be right back.